From Wii Sports to bizarre number stations and everything in between, I'm really starting to think something big is about to happen. That said, false flags are nothing new, and we have a very long history of seeing them enacted upon America and its citizens. Indeed, there are a number of dates on screen that I would recommend looking into if you're confused about what I mean, although at this point I think most people are probably pretty familiar with the idea of a false flag. Historically, false flags are typically used to change people's perspective from being anti-war to pro-war, but in reality you can use a false flag for almost anything. And as such, today we sit on a precipice, a very strange one. For the first time in a long time, there's a conflict going on that almost nobody in this country wants to be involved in, with only 21% of US citizens supporting US involvement in Iran, which is likely dropped as the days and weeks drag on and will soon be months, and as more and more people see that this is terrible for everything, from the economy to gas prices to jobs, and obviously most of all, the human lives that are being lost. And so many people are anticipating that there's going to be something big that's going to happen, like the USS Maine incident of the 1800s that launched the Spanish-American War, something that is so terrible, but also convenient, happening all at once. And like the USS Maine, those paying attention seem to think it's going to be a very intentional act conducted by our own government or those claiming to be allies. That might sound cuckoo. I don't even know if that does at this point, honestly, but if it did, I'd recommend looking up something called Operation Northwoods, where the government wrote an entire plan on how they would enact these events on the people. One of which, if I'm not mistaken, involves using planes, but that's a topic for another time. This in mind, I think we should all be very alarmed that the signs something is about to happen are getting more and more apparent, and fears are growing globally that something huge is at play. And now obviously this is just my opinion based on some of the evidence I am seeing, but I do think it's interesting and worth diving into. Whether or not something happens though, only time will tell. Everything going on in Iran and the conflict that is growing is a huge topic. It's not precisely the topic of this video, but it is worth saying at this point we're not even talking about or applying judgment to what's happening there. That is a whole different topic. What's going on right now is surely talking about the possibility for false flags. And whether or not you're pro-war or anti-war, I think we can all come together and admit that these things we're gonna get into are very, very weird. And considering how unpopular this war is, now with more and more Americans losing their lives in this conflict, as well as obviously the massive amounts of money that goes into technology that's being shot out of the sky or blown off the ground, and obviously, on top of that, the $1 billion a day being spent on the conflict, there's not a lot of public support for this. And I want to reiterate that's $1 billion with a B and a per day with a per day. That $1 billion a day could be going to helping veterans on the street rather than creating new veterans to go to the street. And so if people are going to keep putting up with this, there's going to have to be a very good reason to do so. And it's going to have to change perspectives. And historically, what has worked best has been an attack on the home front. And now I want to say this is not a call for anything. Do not take this that way. This is just exploring what could possibly happen as things escalate. But the reason why attacks on mainland America have worked so well historically is because America, for the entire time of its national history, has only once been invaded on land, and that was in the War of 1812. Other than that, we've only ever seen conflict via a newspaper or a screen, which has resulted in an incredibly desensitized population that doesn't really understand the real life effects of war, only what the TV man shows us. And so with that structure laid out, let's get into some of the things that have been happening recently that are making a lot of people very concerned. One of the first things we have to discuss about false flags, and one of the biggest screw yous of the war, are one and the same. And it's these Iranian drones that are really cheap to produce for a war vehicle and are capable of destroying things vastly more expensive than itself, whether that's people, whether that's planes, whether that's tanks or other military technology. It blows it right out of the sky. It is a great example of how war is changing from big fat machines to something sleeker. But what's important about these drones is that the US has captured several of them and then went and reverse engineered them to rebuild an identical version, as well as create improved versions of them. Now, I guess at first this doesn't sound that weird. Perhaps they just wanted to know what the enemy technology was, but to recreate an identical version is a little odd, as our military contractors are already pretty aware that these technologies exist and that they're very useful. And so presuming we already do have a more advanced and capable version, it is curious then what the actual purpose of this drone might be, because it wouldn't be deployed into combat, or at least not combat as we currently see it. And so the timing is very curious, as very recently, just within the past several days of recording this, there was an announcement that the FBI had sent warnings to the government of California that there could be attacks on the West Coast via Iranian drone ships, launching drones that kamikaze themselves into various targets across the western seaboard and across California specifically. The media and social media understandably blew up about this and were like, what? as threats to California from a foreign nation have never happened. So people became curious and immediately suspicious of whether or not this was even true, that Iran was the one threatening this, as the FBI is who warned us. It's not like Iran was making public threats. And another thing people pointed out was that Iran is 7,500 plus miles away from California, and these drones only have a range of something like 2,500 kilometers. And so they wouldn't be able to hit anywhere in mainland America unless they were launched by a pretty huge warship. And the odds of a warship traveling all the way from Iran to the US right now without being caught or stopped are basically zero, unless that was the whole plan and someone wanted that to happen. So obviously suspicions have grown very high just on this. But when Gavin Newsom came out and started talking about this, the governor of California, people began to question what was going on even more, as it's a really weird snippet from a press conference. Here it is now.
As it relates to the broader concern, as it relates to drone strikes, we've been aware of that information. We've been working collaboratively through the SOC, which we established right after the war began, the State Operations Center, working with the Office of Emergency Service, but also working locally to make sure we transmit any information that we have received, and we're aware of that, which has been reported, I think, by ABC7. We're aware of that information, and we transfer that information in real time to our local partners. Drone issues have been always top of mind, and we've assembled some work groups specifically around those concerns. But that's all I'll share at the moment. I have nothing more insightful beyond just what's been reported and how we're transmitting what we know to our local partners, which is critical.
But here's where things get really weird. After Gavin Newsom speaks, within really hours, there was a shift in the news story, and it was no longer that the FBI had warned this, it became an unverified tip. Despite there being a huge amount of news reporting on this from every spectrum of the political aisle, and on top of that, everywhere on social media it was reported, and there were screenshots of what the original story was. And so it's become a really big question as why would the FBI have leaked this information if it didn't mean it, and then go back on it just hours later? But that's not all. When the shift began in the media, what it came with was reporting that the White House and officials at the White House had been telling ABC News and other news media to take it back, that that wasn't true, and that it was all just an unverified tip, which I find very hard to believe. And I wonder if something leaked out and then they were like, oh, this wasn't supposed to come out. And I also find it hard to believe because evidently the governor of California had been made aware directly of these quote unquote unverified reports and was preparing and had had a SOC conference just on this very matter. So is it an unverified tip and report, or are there actual threats being reported and they know of things that are possibly going to happen and are holding high-level meetings in the government about it? Which one is it? Because we have two different stories as of now. But the fact that we have Iran incapable of reaching, as far as we're aware, mainland America with these drones, and then US media leaking a story that then gets retracted by the US government about drones coming to California, it has understandably made a lot of people question what is going on, especially after we know that the US was reverse engineering these drones and had successfully reproduced the drones themselves. Needless to say, curiosity has only grown since then. And so after this whole drone narrative began to catch a lot of flack online and in the media, the story shifted again to an even more current ongoing threat that is being pressed from the government towards the people. That being of Iranian sleeper cells that were allowed in during the Biden regime. And admittedly, I saw this one coming from a mile away. When I read the news reporting that supposedly tens of millions of people had come here illegally over the course of those 4 years under Biden, I was like, maybe true, maybe not, but either way, a very convenient number of people to blame any kind of act on. Because if you do have 30 million, 40 million, 50 million new people here illegally, then of course there could be terrorists in there. And of course there could be wrongdoers in there. In fact, the math would suggest there definitely are many of them. And so when I started hearing more about sleeper cells, and that was becoming a new trending topic of conversation, as it were, I was very, very curious, because we went from Iranian drone attacks via ships off the coast of California to sleeper cells in like a few days. So let's listen to this clip from Trump and get an idea of what I'm talking about.
They try to hit us back. Have you been briefed about how many Iran sleeper cells there could be inside the U.S. right now?
I have been, and a lot of people came in through Biden with this stupid open border. But we know where most of them are. We've got our eye on all of them, I think.
Is it dozens?
They came in through the open border policies of Sleepy Joe Biden. one of the worst president in the history of our country. And we've got our eyes on all of them. But the war itself is being prosecuted at a level that nobody's seen before. It's pretty amazing to watch.
It's amazing how these threats can apparently not exist up until it's convenient, and then it's not even a question of whether or not they do exist. As you can hear in the Trump interview, he doesn't question that they exist in a way like we're all supposed to assume that that was a given. But interestingly, he also tells us in that exchange kind of two things at the same time, both that they know where they are and that they don't fully know where they all are, which gives that sort of ambiguity where if something happens to a mall or a building, for instance, then, oh, we lost them. We didn't know they were in here. They came in with those 30 million other people. And then there you go, plausible deniability. And funny enough, right around the time all these clips are going viral, another story just so happens to pop up. And this one is about 4 drones that were stolen by 2 men from a US military base. And there's really no other way around it. It is one of these stranger headlines I've ever read, because the more you think about it, the less sense it makes. And you slowly realize there's like zero logic to the story whatsoever. And so we're gonna read through a couple of sites that have documented this. This one comes from the Military Times. 4 drone systems were stolen from a Kentucky Army Engineer Battalion in Kentucky late last year. The Army investigators reported in a social media post this week. Remind you, this happened last year. We'll get there in a second. The Skydio X-10D drone systems were last seen in the 326th Division Engineer Battalion at Fort Campbell on November 21st of 2025. The Army Criminal Investigation Division, or CID, said, prompting them to offer a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the responsible party. Investigators said the drones were stolen between November 21st and 24th, but they did not say when the theft was discovered. Skydio X-10D are small, unmanned aerial drone systems that can be used by the military for battlefield intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. The systems can also use artificial intelligence to avoid obstacles in flight. I've also read that they use 5G towers to have basically infinite signal range. Army investigators released photos of 2 suspects wearing head coverings, dark sweatshirts, and long pants and closed-toed shoes. They also included photos of 2 vehicles potentially involved in the theft, a light-colored 4-door sedan and a dark-colored 4-door truck. Here are the guys on screen now, one of whose faces isn't even covered. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Investigators have asked anyone with information about the theft to contact the Army's Criminal Investigation Division or submit an anonymous tip online. Let's keep reading from a different article. This one's from MSN on the same topic. Fort Campbell is adamant there is no threat to the public and that the stolen drones were equipped only with small cameras. I don't really trust the guys who lost the drones to tell me that. These drones were stolen from a locked storage area within a secured government building, Fort Campbell said. The individuals responsible had authorized access to the military installation and the building, and they defeated the locks on the storage cages to perpetuate this theft. This was a targeted act, not a random breach of security. Okay, so in the same tiny paragraph, you've told me the following. 1, that these guys not only were not random, they were planned. Somehow you know there's no threat, and that they only have cameras, but besides the point, it was not only planned, they had access to the military base. They had authorized access to the areas within the military base. They were able to go there alone, apparently. They were able to breach the locks and then walk out, presumably holding the drones in their hands, and nobody stopped them. And then they were able to get in their car. And not only did you not catch them at that point, you apparently didn't even get 100% guaranteed footage of the vehicles. Furthermore, the photos you have of the guys on the inside, one of them doesn't even have a mask on his face, yet we're not finding him somehow. And even weirder, the footage itself is from like 1995 style cameras. I'm expecting the US government, at the very least, with all the other AI crap they're trying to pull at scale in America, to have 4K resolution cameras in their bases, especially guarding secure weapons containment sites, where you would think only certain people would be able to access. So that in mind, and the fact this article says these guys had access to these bases and were authorized to be there, it sort of sounds like you're telling me either US military contractors or military members themselves went in and robbed this base and walked right out. And so that, on top of the FBI reports about Iranian drone attacks, and on top of the hoopla with California and re-engineering, reverse engineering these Iranian drones, people are beginning to get really suspicious that we're gonna now see these stolen drones pop up in California or somewhere for an attack. And what's made people even more curious, and me myself for sure, is that as you read, this theft of these drones from the US military base happened last year in November. So why then is it just now being reported when all this other stuff about drones is coming out? It's like they're trying to shoehorn this past event in and make it seem like this is all organic and like maybe it's a Iranian cell that stole these drones. I don't know, but this is starting to look really bad. And this isn't even the weirdest stuff that's going on. Also, this really got me. The US military puts in the better part of $2 trillion per annum into developing their technology and into funding and operating the military. And seriously, $5,000 is the best reward you have for these stolen drones. And not just for the drones, but for the guys who supposedly were able to get authorization to be on the base, supposedly were able to get connections enough to know where these drones are kept, then to break into where they're kept, and then to get out unseen. I would think you'd be putting in a little bit more than $5,000. Also, I guarantee these drones are worth far more than $5,000. I also don't like how they try and emphasize in these articles that these drones just had cameras and that there's nothing to be worried about. Like, these drones aren't strong enough to strap a freaking chunk of C4 to and ram it into something, which is basically what military drones are at this point, these kamikaze strikers. Moreover, these pictures of these two guys, there's just something weird about it. The fact that they don't know who these guys are yet, and also the idea, also, why is the angle, I just thought about this while I was recording this. Why is the angle of these two guys from the floor? I'm not sure what that is. It doesn't really make sense now that I think about it. And is the floor camera the only angle we have? Why is it on the floor? Dude, what the frick is with the floor cam? I'm so confused. I did not notice that was weird until right now. What? Let's continue. And so right now, as it stands, if we were to take these threats of an attack with drones on American soil are real and are legit threats, then we have opportunity, we have the means, and we have the motive. We've also got so much plausible deniability in this whole, it's just a cell and it's some, oh no, these drones that got stolen were involved, and who knows, you can basically graft in any narrative bits that you want into a story like this. But let's not stop there. We gotta continue and start looking a little bit further. It's very clear at this point, and I think we all knew this, apparently except for the people in the government, that Iran wasn't just going to back down and let the US beat them with a giant stick, and is swinging back a lot harder than apparently anyone in the US government anticipated. And so if regime change is the actual goal, and we've already taken out the religious supreme leader of Iran, why hasn't anything changed? Well, that's because you obviously can't change a regime and maintain that regime change unless you have boots on the ground and guys enforcing that change. And although we've never actually done it successfully, we have temporarily changed regimes in other countries, and every time it's required American blood and billions and trillions of American dollars. And so that being the case, it should be no surprise that we went from no new foreign wars to now Trump is ordering a Marine Expeditionary Force into Iran. And although Expeditionary Force sounds like Boy Scouts and a couple of guys, it's actually 2,500 men typically. We also have reports of 5,000 other men being called up from Asia to help guard refineries and oil interests in the region. So now we're starting to look at a pretty considerable army being moved into that part of the world. Not to mention all the people already over there. You know, you can't launch strikes via planes unless you have aircraft carriers, which require thousands of men. And you can't have these planes flying, which also require hundreds more men. And you can't have all these planes refueling in the air. And you can't do any of this without military bases, all of which require thousands more men. So we're slowly looking at a pretty huge operation, and like we said, it's already costing at least around about $1 billion a day to run this war. And that's just the material cost. The actual cost of the war is much greater. We're already seeing skyrocketing gas prices across the country, in the world, which we're going to talk about in another video, with people paying already, like myself, $12 to $20 more per gallon in the US, just compared to prices a week and change ago. So really we're talking about billions of dollars per day, if not more. But that being said, it's pretty clear then that this war in Iran won't be any different. It's going to require men on the ground. And people already don't like the idea of this war, and they really don't like the idea of their young men, their sons, dying for it. But what people hate even more than that is the idea of being forced into doing it. Because at this point, at least these people in the military volunteered for it, right? And they chose this profession for the most part. But imagine a world where you don't have a choice, where the government comes to your door like they do in Ukraine and they take you. That is what people are beginning to fear more and more. And rightfully so, as there are news reports of how Trump hasn't closed off all his options, including the idea of a draft to try and get young men involved in this conflict.
Mothers out there are worried that we're going to have a draft, that they're going to see their sons get in and daughters get involved in this. What do you want to say about the president's plans for troops on the ground? As we know, it's been largely an air campaign up until now.
It has been, and it will continue to be, and President Trump wisely does not remove options off of the table. I know a lot of politicians like to do that quickly, but the president, as commander-in-chief, wants to continue to assess the success of this military operation. It's not part of the current plan right now, but the president, again, wisely keeps his options on the table.
But even worse and more alarming to me is something in the NDAA that the government made official in 2026. It was a very small adjustment to the NDAA, admittedly, but small things often have huge ramifications in documents like this, as the NDAA stands for the National Defense Authorization Act. And if you look at it, there's a section that was removed and then replaced with the following words. I'm going to read it to you in whole though. SEC 535, Selective Service System, Automatic Registration. This is not good. Automatic registration. The Military Service Act 50 U.S.C. 3801 is amended by striking Section 3 and inserting the following new Section 3. Except as otherwise provided in this title, every male citizen of the United States and every other male person residing in the United States between the ages of 18 and 26 shall be automatically registered under this act by the director of the Selective Service System. This doesn't apply to aliens though, living here illegally. What's very funny about this document is that it's made some waves already, although I don't think nearly enough, especially if you're a man between the ages of 18 and 26 in America. But what we're being told by the mainstream media is that no. This doesn't mean you're gonna get drafted. That's not what this means. But if you read it carefully, that's actually exactly what this is aimed at. What it's saying is that it's going to expedite the process in the case of a draft, in the case of conscription. Doing more research is going to use things like social security records and basically any and all records, which I'm sure are going to be using AI to aggregate this data. And so when the mainstream media says it doesn't mean you're going to be drafted, that doesn't mean you're going to be drafted in the most technical sense. To me, this is sort of like if you were to get in the car and turn it on, everyone assumes you're driving. Why do you need to make an amendment like this to the National Defense Authorization Act unless you plan on using it? Why now, and when we were on the cusp of a war, which has since begun? Why are we making changes, expediting the draft process, unless you plan on using it? I truly hope this horrifies you, because in my mind, this means something big is coming. The government is fully aware that no one wants to fight for them anymore. There are very few people actually signing up for service, and rightfully so, because we all know they're in the files. But on top of that, we have seen years of reduced registration, which has resulted in a way smaller and less effective military. Thankfully though, like I said, the mainstream media says this doesn't mean you're drafted. And so perhaps if this was just an insular incident, it was one of a kind. We weren't in the middle of a war. That might not be that big of a deal, this amendment, because it could mean for any time in the future. But when we are literally in a war that people hate, the only reason I can conceive of changing this would be if you planned on using it. So be vigilant, because this is getting weird. And when you compare this instance of the NDAA changing to all the other stuff we've just talked about, it seems like the proverbial stars are aligning here. And as such, the last time there was a war, arguably as unpopular as Iran, was Vietnam. And during the Vietnam War in 1973 was the last time we had a draft in the United States. And it was a deeply unpopular thing, which resulted in massive chaos in the country. And I can only imagine that that chaos would be magnified dramatically if it were to happen today. But there is more while we talk about war. We've been seeing tons of clips from some of the more degenerate people, from Pam Bondi to Pete Hegseth, or however you pronounce his name, saying some wild things.
The Dow right now is over. The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000.
Set back a nuclear program in ways that other presidents would have dreamed. How about we celebrate that? How about we talk about how special America is, that only we have these capabilities? I think it's too much to ask, unfortunately, for the fake news. So we're used to that. But we also have an opportunity to stand at the podium and read the truth of what's really happening. And the reality is, you want to call it destroyed, you want to call it defeated, you want to call it obliterated, choose your word. This was an historically successful attack. We should celebrate it as Americans, and it gives us a chance to have peace, chance to have a deal, and an opportunity to prevent a nuclear Iran, which is something President Trump talked about for 20 years.
And so I find it very bizarre with everything we've discussed, from the NDAA to these Iranian drones being repurposed and these drones being stolen, that top US government officials are moving into Pentagon housing. And what that means is the Pentagon has whole housing systems for top-ranking military officials that are designed to be protected from attacks and are anonymous and are more secure because these people have access to top-of-the-line information about how the American system, military-wise, is working. And now you have people in the Trump administration, including Pete Hegseth, including Pam Bondi, and others, moving into this fortified housing system for the Pentagon, to the point there's actually a shortage of this housing forming, resulting in the government having to repurpose old entities and old installations to house these people. We know of one instance of a renovation of a home costing $137,000. We have examples of some of these officials moving into closed down military bases, which are now being operated as their, and it's not just like a few people. We don't have all the names, but it's causing actual shortages of housing for top government officials that are supposed to have the access to this housing, and it's just being taken by people who are worried. For instance, Pam Bondi's excuse was worries about retaliation of the Epstein files and other things related to that, which again is sounding like you're saying you're worried about the people getting angry at you for the things you're doing and covering up, which makes me think even further that you're planning things like using this new NDAA authorization to help with the draft, and that you're preparing for a possible false flag attack. And so then I had to wonder, you have all these people moving from DC where they live, including $3.75 million house in range of DC, and now they're pushing outwards into outlying areas. It sounds like they're trying to avoid something that's coming. And so the fact that so many of these officials are engaged in this move out like they don't want to be in DC makes me wonder if something's going to happen to DC. And so I wonder then if perhaps the California release of information was either an accident and it's going to happen, or was a false flag for a false flag and they might be planning on doing something to DC with these drones. Presuming that's what's going to happen. And I suppose the logic of that would be that DC is perceived as the heart of America because politicians are there and infinite sums of money flow through there. In reality, it's more like the rectum after a bad day of Taco Bell. But for the sake of perception, that is how DC is viewed. It's almost like the heart. So in the theoretical off chance someone was beginning or theoretically trying to make a false flag happen, DC might be perceived as one of the last places that would wake people up. But what do I know? Because I think New York round 2 for another Middle Eastern war would be a little too obvious. That said, though, it's also pretty unsettling that the US military has been trying to make the military more interesting to 18 to 26-year-olds for a little while now. But now with these recent campaigns in Iran, they're posting, and I have a video also planned on this, absurdly weird propaganda on the matter using like Wii Sports memes and GTA memes. It's like they're trying to make this some fun campaign and a video game, when in reality this is actual war, and they're making light of the loss of human lives, and it's so weird. But above all else, in everything we've discussed today, what makes me most concerned about what's going on is radio station V32. Now, this is a very underreported segment of this whole concept of a false flag and the Iran war as a whole, and I wonder if that's for a reason, because the V32 situation is arguably the most bizarre thing that's happening at scale here. Now, V32, calling it a radio station is accurate, but more accurate would be calling it a number station. Number stations are a radio station that is broadcasting various numbers which contain a secret code. You'll also sometimes hear music or phrases and beeps and other noises. It's a very disconcerting and eerie thing to listen to, and it became famous during the Cold War because of a Soviet Union number station called the Buzzer, as well as others that still operate today. And for Gen Z, as well as a generation right above ours, you'll also recognize number stations from the classic meme from Call of Duty.
Numbers, Mason. That's all we've ever wanted.
What do the numbers mean, Mason? That's literally a number station. So number stations are a weirdly fixated part of culture. Due to their often obscure locations, number stations can be very hard to pinpoint. And once you have, it doesn't really help at all because the code is itself completely uncrackable. It's called a one-time pad, and it's where assets in the field have access to this tool that allows them to break the codes that are being sent via the tower. So the broadcast could be giving out 4 words followed by 50 numbers spoken into the microphone that nobody on Earth would ever be able to crack, but someone, an asset anywhere on Earth who hears that radio station would have the appropriate tools to decipher it. It is a very unique system because although it can be heard by anybody for the most part, it is only knowable to the person you actually intend the information to get to. And as such, it was huge for spies on both sides of the Cold War for decades. And it was really during that last Cold War that number stations began their decline, or at least many people thought, because number stations are still active today, many of which have been active for decades on end. But there have been very few to almost zero new number stations since that time, which is why V32 is very interesting, because within 12 hours of the first American and Israeli strikes on Iran, this tower, V32, went live. And so we're going to read from some people who are far more expert on this subject matter of number stations than I am. And this first one is from a website of sleuths in the radio world and radio operators who come together to analyze these sorts of things. And what they talk about is fascinating. And from the basic description of this radio station, we also learn that the media has been lying. Because what's been reported is that this is an Iranian number station talking to agents in the field as a whole. But what these guys have found out, and what has now become the growing story, is that this is actually a radio station operated from outside of Iran, talking to people within it, rather than the opposite way around, which was originally what we were told. V32 normally transmits daily on 7842 kilohertz at 2 UTC and 18 UTC. Its broadcasts are apparently pre-recorded, the 18 UTC transmission repeating the previous 2 UTC one. The grouping of numbers is inconsistent across or within transmissions, ranging from properly formatted 5-digit groups to digits spoken one by one with clear separation. Sections are separated by the word travoya, which is Persian for attention, spoken 3 times. V32 was first logged on February 28th of 2026, about 12 hours after the first strikes against Iran that started the war. The station was reported by the Priam team within the first minute of its 18 UTC transmission, which is believed to be its very first transmission ever. The first positively confirmed 2 UTC transmission took place a few days later on March 3rd. I also love how these guys caught it in the first minute. The station initially used 7910 kilohertz at that time. Starting at March 4th, 2026, the Iranian so-called bubble jammer showed up on that frequency and has since been observed covering that frequency during the transmission times. Coincidentally, V32 suspended its scheduled transmissions after that and then later reappeared using the new frequency instead. That was the first thing I read that really caught me off guard. It was that the Iranians are the ones jamming this signal. So in all likelihood, it would seem that a Western power is using a relatively old system of communication for spies across the world. So as we're hearing about threats of terror cells in America hidden, we have a Western power, possibly America, using an old school way of communicating with sleeper cells in other countries. Just makes you think about what's really going on. It's often a lot of, this is what they're doing while you're doing exactly what you claim the other side is doing. But what's really interesting is that the people on this site have managed to quite possibly locate this whole thing themselves, where the radio station is actually broadcasting from. First, TDOA multilateration results consistently locate V32's transmitter far outside Iran, pointing to an origin in Western Europe, an area comprised of US allies, at least for now, somewhere in an area encompassing northern Italy, Switzerland, Western Germany, Eastern France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The jamming attempts by a well-known Iranian jammer are another clear sign. Most other number stations in general are comprehensive operations targeting many different recipients in different countries, making use of many different transmission times and frequencies for it. In contrast, The fact that V-32 uses a single same frequency would be consistent with an operation based outside Iran that needs to target a single geographical area, that being Iran. Now, this isn't me coming up with this information. These are people who are experts in their field and who do this kind of stuff for fun, which is really cool because radios are awesome. But all that information in mind, it becomes pretty clear that either us as the US or one of our allies in Western Europe is operating one of these things. Because if a bunch of guys online can find out where this thing is located, the government's fully aware, or could be fully aware if they chose to, exactly who is behind this station and stop it if that were their goal. So I think it's pretty obvious that this likely is not the goal, that being stopping it. And if this tower really is communicating to people in Iran, gotta wonder what they're saying, and why they're using a radio tower might seem pretty interesting at first. I suppose it does give a sense of encryption, right? That the internet doesn't offer. But we also know that Iran has almost no internet left. I've read something like 4% of the internet is still active there. So if that's the case, number of stations makes sense because the radio tower is somewhere thousands of miles away and can keep broadcasting no matter what's happening on the ground, requiring very little infrastructure on the ground in the middle of these conflict zones. But what's possibly more intriguing to me is that this tower is so powerful, and I don't think this is normal. It's being heard from the eastern US all the way into Iran and even further than that, as well as across Europe. It's actually really cool to see these people who are experts at what they do chatting it up with each other online and sharing recordings of these things when they go live. And once again, I'm super impressed with these people, and the link to their site is on here, for finding this radio station within a minute of its first broadcast. That's impressive stuff. And I want to reiterate, if there were to be a false flag, I find it interesting that it can communicate with people in Iran, but it can also reach the eastern US and it can reach Europe. I think it's easier for us to assume they're communicating with Iran, which can be very real, but the fact that it is able to reach the US could mean that it is talking to sleeper cells. It just might mean that they're not Iranian sleeper cells. In Iran, it could very well be sleeper cells that the US government and or its allies are trying to activate in the US against the US. And so I really don't know where to go from there, except that I hope you all stay safe and you stay vigilant, because things are only getting crazier out there in this world, even since the last time I said that at the end of a video. And I especially call you to caution because just recently White House officials began the training of 20,000 guardsmen with the purpose of being ready at a moment's notice for dealing with civil unrest in the nation, potentially even authorizing them for the use of force against Americans. And now that is not the sign that we want to be seeing here, as it would appear once again, the government is maybe even hedging its bets that we guess what's going on here and preparing for that. And this new 20,000 is part of a call out for each US state to train roughly 500 National Guardsmen specifically for fast deployment for dealing with the heightened and immediate impact of something, of unrest and what causes that. Once again, they're described as quick response teams, and the federal government is calling upon each state to train at least 500 of them. So stay vigilant, guys, because things are getting weird. That all being said, thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see each and every one of you in the next one.